My name is Allison Felis, and this is I'll Follow You, a podcast featuring light and lively conversations about film, music, and creative culture, coming to you from the People's Republic of Rogers Park on the far northeast side of Chicago. Today, I'm delighted to be in conversation with Brian Westfall. Brian is the proprietor of the shop Rare Birds Musical Oddities. Rare Birds is a shop dedicated to those elusive, beautiful, and lovingly weird pieces that will bring character and vibe to your recording dates, home studio, and performances. Vintage guitars, basses, and synths, cowbells once owned by real cows, Casio keyboards once owned by real 1980s kids, maracas brought back from a great-aunt's college trip to Mexico, drum machines that used to sit on Grandma's organ, toy pianos from Christmas 1958, wheezing chord organs, middle school band orchestra glockenspiels, and much more await you when you visit Rare Birds Musical Oddities. As Brian and I nerd out about all things gear-related, we also discuss why this is a great time to be a musician streaming performances online, how nostalgia plays a part in the Rare Birds shopping experience, the frustration of how elusive the really cool stuff can be, why he actually encourages his customers to resell the gear they've bought from him, and why he's more interested in what you're doing with your gear rather than what gear you have. Be sure to visit my blog, queenofpeaches.com, for links to the Rare Birds online shop and Instagram page, as well as a listing of a lot of the Chicago musicians and bands that come up in the course of our chat. And now, my conversation with Brian Westfall of Rare Birds Musical Oddities. So, hi, Brian. Thank you so much for being willing to chat with me today.
Hey, Allison. Yeah, thanks for having me.
It's a beautiful Saturday in Chicago, and if things were normal, we would love to just roll on down and see you in person, but as it is.
Yeah. Strange times for sure, but good times for making music.
Yes, this is true.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we've been meaning to do more of it, and we did a little. I think you saw the Pink Moon recording that we did a couple weeks ago. Yeah,
that was really cool. One of my favorites.
So we're
one of my favorite songs too.
Yeah, no, it was. I was surprised. I mean, I know that song is beloved, but we put it up on Facebook, and everyone was like, "Oh my gosh, I'm so happy to hear this, and this is really what I needed tonight." And we were like, "Wow, okay, well, we hit a nerve with that, so that was."
Have
cool.
you been getting that response a lot? I really have too, with just things I've done, and also with some of the stuff that Joe, the singer of my band, has put out on Instagram, and just various music things that I've put out in the world recently. People seem so appreciative of it, more so. I think there's just, I don't know, people are looking for some just sort of comfort, I guess, and finding it in music, which is good, really good. And
yeah, and I mean, did you guys sell a bunch on the big Bandcamp sale yesterday?
We I don't know if we did. I don't handle the Bandcamp stuff with the band, to be honest. And then we've actually dove into the Spotify and all that whole mess. So we've kind of put our resources there a little bit more, but that's cool. I didn't even know they were doing a sale.
Yeah, they've been doing it periodically, once a month. I mean, basically since all the coronavirus stuff started happening, where they'll knock off their share that they take on one day. And so it's kind of like, okay, everybody on this one day, go download all of your Bandcamp stuff, and then the artists get the full amount, other than whatever PayPal processing fees
cool.
and stuff.
That's really cool.
But Bandcamp itself doesn't take anything on those days, which has been a nice thing. So yeah, we Brian and I, the Felix Kremen's band most recent album, we had a couple downloads, which was really, really nice to see. So that was
cool. That's good.
It's always a good excuse to then just in a non-annoying way rehype the album if people have forgotten about it too.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
So before we get too much further into our chat here, I mean, I would love for you to just give a little intro to yourself as a human being and what you do musically and with the shop and everything.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Brian. I own a shop called Rare Birds Music, and it's kind of like a sound source store. It's online only right now. My site is rarebirdsmusic.com, but I have had I had a pop up shop in the Andersonville neighborhood in Chicago, and yeah, I sell all kinds of cool stuff. Cool in my opinion. I have a lot of electronics, a lot of vintage stuff, a lot of pedals for guitar and synthesizers, drum machines, stuff going back. I've had stuff in my shop going back to the 1940s, and then all the way up to stuff that's really current. So yeah, I sell. I do a little bit of repair work, and I do some rentals, and yeah, that's what I do.
So I love your social media presence. I have to say,
Oh,
like
nice.
the Rare Birds Instagram page is like such a joy because it's like the gear always like looks amazing and you take really good care to like take really good photos and your captions are like always really funny.
Thank you. Yeah,
So
yeah.
like was that part of the part like when you branched off into like doing your own
Mhm.
business, was that something where you're like, I really need to harness social media, or does that just kind of come naturally to you?
Yeah, when I so I worked at a very prominent music store in Chicago for many years. I was a sales manager there, and as in the time that I was there, like the whole industry, the music retail industry, really changed. From kind of more of a face to face thing to a very much internet based um, type of business. So yeah, I mean, I was so in the trenches doing it and just trying to sell and learn about gear and be knowledgeable that I kind of neglected the social media side of it. And there were other people that, were that was their job to do that at the store. And so when I left, I was like, well, this is cool. This is a chance for me to be really kind of creative with photography, which I'm very much an amateur at, but have learned a lot and writing, which is actually kind of sort of my background in terms of that was my major in college. It's a journalism major, and I do some creative writing on the side. So I really like writing up descriptions for guitars and instruments and just trying to be creative with it. So yeah, to be able to kind of take over the reins with the social media has been good for me, and I think it's important, obviously. It's kind of everywhere these days, and it's how a lot of people shop for gear. So, yeah.
Well, and it's sort of how people probably find you now since you
Yep.
are a temporarily online only, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. I mean, when I first, so I had the pop up shop fairly soon after I left CME and started Rare Birds Music, and so that was because I had a physical store. There wasn't quite as pressing of a need to get into the social media, but I was doing it anyways. But now, yeah, it's an online shop, so yeah, that's how it has to be done, and that's how I get the word out there.
And I feel like, tell me if I'm wrong, but I feel like you do have a nice distinctive presence that sort of does that help you like in selling and stuff? Because it seems like with so much of gear sales being online these days, you really do need to have that like special something that really sets you apart. And so do you feel like that helps?
Yeah, definitely. Well, it's funny. I've kind of learned along the way. I've also been sort of indirectly told this, but you kind of, if you have cool stuff, you have unique stuff, and vintage really helps with that because it's kind of inherently unique. You tend to the gear kind of does the talking, right? So you don't have to really go out there and advertise it specifically. You just have to make sure it's out there and you have enough of it out there and you have the cool stuff because there's absolutely nothing wrong with an MXR carbon copy or like a Roland TR8 or something that's really everywhere, but that stuff is not quite as easy to sell, I think, just because there's so many different places you can get it. But if you have really unique pieces, people tend to seek it out and they're just kind of interested by it. So they sort of do the talking, and then I just kind of help them along a little bit.
Well, and I feel like because yeah, your selection is so cool. I mean, my partner Brian and I have bought a lot of gear from you over the
Yeah,
years, and
yeah, I
the
appreciate
things that we really love are the omnichords that we
it.
picked
Yeah.
up because
Mhm.
where the Brian was such a huge fan of Daniel Lanois, and has, had remembered seeing photos of, his circuit bent, whatever things that all the different like mods that he had done to the omnichords with, and work with Eno and stuff too. And we'd never had access to one. And so that like was really kind of a game changer for us, in terms of having this, more basic, chords that it is available to play, but in that sort of limitation becomes that freedom of like, oh, how can I make interesting sounds with this? And so I feel like you really excel at getting in these crazy pieces. And so where did that ethos kind of come from of wanting to focus on that stuff?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've always been intrigued by weird pieces, and I've always been sort of a simpleton when it comes to music creation. I can't get too into the weeds sometimes with things with way too many knobs, or way, downloading software and stuff. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, and people make amazing music that way. But for me, I like the simple stuff, and I like the charm of some of the older pieces. And something like an omnichord, if your listeners aren't familiar, I mean, it's this basically this device that's kind of like it's kind of like an auto harp, but it's all digital, and it's from the 1980s. But yeah, I mean, something like that where you can literally you don't really need to even know how to play it. It's just all about your creativity. You hit a button and it plays a chord. You hit another button and it plays a different chord. And then, of course, you can circuit bend it like people have done. You can put it out into some of your guitar effects and manipulate it that way. But yeah, I guess I got into that stuff just out of, well, first of all, I didn't really see another shop in Chicago that really had stuff like that, that was dealing in kind of like some of the less expensive stuff. Everything seems so serious, when you go into music shop, and I love expensive guitars, and I love expensive amps and all that stuff. And I have some of that stuff in my shop, but I didn't see anybody really like, I've never walked into a major music store and seen an omnichord on the wall. I've never seen like an 80s Casio, that other than like at maybe a pawn shop or something like that. And so I just wanted to get the cool stuff, and not all old cheap Casios are cool, but there are some that are really great. And I like to have that kind of cool stuff in the shop. And it was also a way to get into this early without spending huge amounts of capital to get really, really expensive guitars. So yeah, it's a combination of that, my interest in it, and then sort of the practicality of getting the less expensive stuff, and just seeing what kind of artists and kind of weirdos I could attract with this kind of gear.
Well, because I mean, that's got to be, an attractor to a certain slice of a kind of clientele, like me and Brian, where we do like this weird stuff, and stuff with a little bit of a sense of humor.
I've met the coolest people working at the shop, including you guys. Yeah, I did tap into a market of people that I think didn't necessarily have a place to go for this stuff. So yeah, it's been really cool, and it's always interesting seeing who's going to be looking at some piece, who you can connect with, some weirdo piece with some weirdo person. It's always great.
Because do people like, is it like being a teacher where it's like, show your work? Do people like come back to you and be like, hey man, like listen to this crazy thing I recorded with the thing I got from you?
Yeah, all the time. It's really cool. And I've had, some noise artists like send me clips of like just bizarre stuff they've done with my gear, like these crazy soundscapes. I've seen singer-songwriters. I had a customer that I had a great connection with, and he ended up giving me some African rhythmic instruments that I'd never even heard of, because he was like so inspired by some of the stuff in my shop. So yeah, it's been really cool, and I do get a lot of I get to see my pieces, my former pieces in action, which is nice.
You're like you're like a pet adoption service or something, where it's like you get all these little misfits, and then they go out and bring so much joy to people in the world.
Yeah. I had a gentleman that bought this like wheezing, barely working chord organ from me. It was a really tiny chord organ from the 1950s that had a little electrical fan. It sounds like an accordion basically, but it has an electrical fan. So it's set up like a keyboard or an organ, and you hit a button and it has this electrical fan that blows air through the reeds in it. And
Hmm.
he had no idea he wanted it. He came in looking for a different piece that he ended up not really digging, and I showed him that, and he bought it, and he ended up doing the entire score for a film that he was scoring. It actually was premiered at like the Cannes Film Festival in France, and yeah, it was awesome, and he was ecstatic about it.
That's so cool.
Yeah, so yeah, it's definitely cool. You are kind of like giving up these little or letting these little children of yours go and trying to find them good homes. Yeah.
So, like, is there any like holy grail stuff that you are like always keeping an eye out for that you haven't had come through yet, or like
Ooh.
again, as far as like you have this idea of the way that you're curating the shop,
Yeah, yeah. Um, there's a bunch of pieces. It's kind of hard to give you one. I mean, um, I'll give you a few examples if that's okay. I love Maestro pedals, Maestro effects. They were a company that was based out of Chicago back in the '60s and '70s, and I think somebody remakes them or has used that name for some other stuff now. But they have all these great sounding pedals, and their design, like the stuff is really beautiful looking too. But yeah, just killer analog fuzzes, and they have one that's a ring mod that I've been looking for a long time, but they're about
yeah.
$1,000, and yeah, they're expensive. But if I find a good deal on one, I'll get it. I love old tape echoes. I have an Echoplex, which Maestro acquired the Echoplex name in the '70s. So I have one of those right now in the shop, and then the Roland Space Echo is another absolutely killer piece. That if you can afford to get into one, I would suggest to your listeners to get one of those for your music making and recording. They just add so much dimension. But yeah, there's all kinds of guitars. I've had a Wandra in the store, which is this Italian guitar maker that made these pieces of art guitars. They're just so gorgeous. I had one of those in like a baby blue color. It was a Wandra Cobra, it was called. Yeah, so I don't know. There's too many to mention. There's too many. But I like usually like American made or Japanese made vintage stuff. There's tons of exceptions to that. I like a lot of old Italian guitars, gear from all over, but typically, yeah, the vintage '60s and '70s guitars, synths, drums, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and like you were saying before, there sort of not being anywhere, especially in Chicago, that was exclusively focusing on this stuff, and it's also, for me, it's like I'm not a guitar player. I'm not like a super gearhead. My gear knowledge mostly comes from like being adjacent to my partner who is a guitar
Yeah.
player, and but I've been around a lot of these shops long enough to know that like the sense of humor that you bring is like so refreshing, because there is this sort of aesthetic to the way that you assemble everything where you're like, yeah, like I can sort of hear your voice like through the way that you put your collections of stuff together, and in the kind of stuff that you lean on and that you advertise. And so yeah, that's like a really remarkable thing I think that you've been able to do in having this voice that's beyond just the gear.
Wow, that's super sweet. That's a nice compliment. Yeah, I so the store I worked at was the Chicago Music Exchange, and that store is like mecca for guitar players. It's an incredible store, and it's a lot of people consider it the greatest music store, the greatest guitar store in the world. But it had a very not necessarily in their social media presence. I think they did a good job with not always being real serious. But when you walked in there, it had this kind of like museum type vibe to it, and a lot of customers would actually say that they were sort of intimidated until they talked to the staff, and then they felt better. But they said they were kind of intimidated by coming in there, and I guess maybe subconsciously that was sort of in the back of my head when I was putting Rare Birds together. Just I wanted it to be a little bit more about discovery and sort of just the possibilities of some of these instruments, and also nostalgia. Nostalgia is a big part of kind of what I do for a lot of
Mm.
people. And I guess I didn't want to necessarily approach it from this like kind of elite sort of angle that some music stores can have sometimes that can kind of turn people off. But I think that was more of a subconscious thing. I don't know if I necessarily did that, knowingly. But yeah, thank you for the compliment. Yeah, I try to curate it and have the cool stuff. It's difficult though sometimes. The cool stuff is elusive and expensive
Well,
sometimes.
so yeah, before we, jump back into talking more gear, like I'd love to hear more of like your origin story of like how, it's like, yeah, you worked at CME and had that experience and that, bled into your shop, but sort of like before that, like how did you start playing music and where did your interest in music come from and how long have you been playing and all that good stuff?
Yeah. So I was a pretty typical kid growing up. I was into sports till I played sports in grade school and then partially in the middle school. But I took this. But I always loved music, and my dad was a really great source for music. He played a lot of classical music and a lot of early rock and roll. And I remember coming home from school one day and he was listening to like Native American chants and stuff like that. So he was a big inspiration, but he wasn't a musician himself. But anyways, in middle school I took this class that was taught guitar and keyboard in one. It was a like a combined course, and I was I think I was at second worst in the class at keyboard and the worst in the class at guitar. And I remember coming home to my mom, and I'm like 14 or something, and I was telling her about this class and how I didn't even want to go to it, and I was so bad at it. And she's like, "Well, why don't you practice at home?" She's like, "I have a guitar," and I was like, "What? You have a guitar?" My mom had a guitar my entire life, and I didn't even know about it. Until, and
That's amazing.
yeah, she pulls out this old Stella Harmony, this like plywood guitar that you was sold at Sears stores, and I proceeded to become obsessed with it. But for a while, I was like determined to be the guitar player that didn't play chords because I thought that was too hard. So I was just going to play single notes. And eventually, I got into it. And around that same time, my older sister's boyfriend at the time made me a mixtape of like alternative rock. He made me a cassette back in the day when you did things like that, and it had like Green Day and Offspring and all these like all this great alternative stuff. And I was just hooked. And I was a guitarist, and I quit sports, and I was like, you couldn't pry the thing out of my hands. And we got a keyboard shortly, like a family keyboard shortly after that. My grandma had her organ whenever we'd go over there, and I'd mess around on that. And got into bands really quickly, or started a band, I should say, that was really just three dudes in their mom's basement that didn't know what they were doing.
I need to know the name of the band though, because it's like that's my favorite thing in the
Oh
world
yeah,
is like people's like what they called their like high school bands.
sure. Yeah. Well, we had a bunch of different names because there's a bunch of different iterations, but it was the late kind of 90s at that point. So when we got serious about naming our band, and so it was the single word names were real popular, like Corn and things like that, Tool,
Yeah.
and we were Debase. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yes, I love it.
exactly. Yeah, you're gonna, I don't know, debase the value of our instruments, I guess, by by playing them. Yeah, so that was us. It was Debase, and we played around the Cleveland area. I'm from Ohio, and we played at a bunch of clubs that are probably not there anymore, and played some shows to 4 or 5 people, things like that. Yeah, those are the good days.
Well, but that's like nothing to sneeze at if you were playing clubs in Cleveland. I mean, because Cleveland's rock scene is well revered.
It is, yeah. Cleveland has made strides. I went back there recently, and I couldn't believe how, I don't know, just how much it's come along, and how many more people there it seemed to be in like the downtown area. But Yeah, even back then it was cool, and it was like it was so exciting going downtown because we were suburbs kids, and going downtown by ourselves and bringing our instruments and playing. I mean, it's just so exciting, And then the few times that we actually did play in front of some people at like some battle of bands when there'd be like 100 people out in the audience or something, that was just there was nothing like that for me. That feeling. So yeah, I was hooked totally. And then eventually, when I got into recording, and I realized that it's just playing live to an audience that wants you to be there, and recording music and being creative is like there's nothing better than that in the world for me. So yeah, I think my path was just sort of chosen for me.
And so, I mean, were you like really trying to make a go of it, or were you trying to get a record deal, or was it
Yeah,
just a way to hang out?
we
Or
just had no idea how to do that, but yeah, we all wanted that. I remember. Well, this is quite a bit later, but I remember turning 27 and not having a record deal or what, like not having a successful band and just being like, oh shit, like that's the age when everybody died, like I'm supposed to be famous. That's like when Hendrix
yeah,
died and like Janis Joplin and like Cobain and everything. So, yeah, that was a hard moment. But yeah, back in the in the early days, yeah, we were trying to do it. We just didn't know how, and it was
right.
such a different landscape for musicians then. I think there's a lot more tools now, but there's also maybe more noise that is hard to sift through for listeners trying to find artists that they like. But yeah, we were out there with staple guns and like hanging up our posters on the street poles and everything. Yeah.
Are you still in touch with those guys?
Some of them, yeah, some of them. My college bands, I talk to some of those guys still, and the high school bands, I think we've all kind of gone our own ways and lost touch. But I still got the records, so, which were not records, they
the
CDs.
the joke that Brian always tells is that one of the guys in one of his college bands is now a thoracic surgeon. So.
Wow.
So it's like you rock out for a period of time and then you got to buckle down,
Yeah, I love seeing those photos of like, young rockers and then like their current state, the accountant or whatever they happen to be.
Or like I love all those the websites that have like the cheesy band photos where everyone's like against a brick wall or like jumping. Like the jumping photos are my favorites.
Oh god, yeah, that's a running joke. The brick wall photo. It's a classic. We actually the band I play in currently that does the country stuff. We were at a venue and taking some photos, and there was a brick wall, so we did that photo, the ubiquitous brick wall band photo.
I mean, it's a classic for a reason. It works. It always looks cool.
Yeah. You don't have to worry about dimension or anything like that. You just line them up and do it.
Well, it gives a little character to the background. There's something for your eye to focus on. Like it's
Exactly. Okay.
And if it's black and white, all the better.
Yeah, right. Yeah, we didn't go black and white, but I'm sure we could manipulate that if we'd like to later.
So tell me about the band. The band that you're currently playing with.
Yeah, so I'm involved in a few different projects, but the main kind of gigging band is called Joe Wartell and the Natural Law, and it's like an old school country band. We do a lot of covers and we do originals too, and it's funny. I've always liked country music. My dad used to play that too, but I never really saw myself doing that. I mean, I grew up on like rock and punk and post-punk and things like that, which I'll always love. But yeah, I happened upon this singer. He's actually a barber too. His name is Joe Ortel, and he just he's got the voice. He sounds like Waylon Jennings, and he was pretty green when it came to putting a band together. He's a younger guy, and he was like, "Yeah, I'll let you put a band together." So I basically got to assemble the band with musicians that I had played with before, and I had a pedal steel player in mind who also plays guitar, and I had a drummer in mind. So I was able to kind of wrangle these guys up, and yeah, we've been doing it for about 3 years and gig all over town. We're gigging all over town before this current lockdown. But yeah, it's a fun band.
So what are you playing in that band? Because
Oh,
I thought I saw a photo of you with bass.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Sorry. I play bass in that band. Yeah. My main instrument's probably guitar. I would say I've been playing that longer, but bass I've really, really come to love the bass. I just love the rhythmic elements of it. I like harmonizing with people, and yeah, so I've really taken to it in the last probably 4 or 5 years, and I seem to get a lot more requests for my bass playing than my guitar playing these days. So
I
yeah.
mean, bass, yeah, that's always like the missing link, right? Is like, there's always going to be like two guitar players who are like, let's start a band,
Yep,
man.
yep.
And then it's like, well, where's the bass player?
Totally. Yeah, yeah. And you can do it. Slater Kinney's done it, and a lot of people have.
Sure,
But
sure.
yeah, I've never heard this might be controversial, but I've never heard a two guitar band that I thought wouldn't benefit from some bass. But again, I'm a bass player, so I love the low end. But anyways, yeah. So that's what I'm doing in the band. I also sing harmonies, and I'm part of the kind of small writing team in the band. And yeah, yeah, we're working on an album that got very very postponed with the lockdown, but we do have music up on Spotify and iTunes and anywhere else you might find your music, YouTube, those kind of places. Yeah,
Awesome. I will link that in the show notes at on my blog for people to go check
yeah,
out.
thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So what's is there any sort of bleed over between, your life as a musician and in the way that you run the shop? I mean, how do those things interrelate for
Oh
you?
yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, everyone, all potential customers should know that not only is the piece of gear you could be buying from a tested out, it is thoroughly tested out. In other words, like I have probably recorded something with it in the short time that I've had it. I've probably obsessively played with all the knobs and like experimented with it. Yeah, every piece of gear that I get, as long as time provided, I usually try to incorporate into like my recording gear for a day or two until it sells. Sometimes longer. So yeah, I love getting something like the Echoplex. I mean, it's just so fun for me to have around until it sells because it's just
I mean, is there any temptation to like remove it from the listing?
yeah, yeah.
Like,
There's temptation. Of course there is. Yeah, it's terrible. Sometimes you get really attached to pieces. Um, it was also kind of a reason for getting into this. Like I
mm,
can buy a $2,000 synthesizer or $1,000 synthesizer or whatever it is, with the knowledge that I'm going to resell it, and then I get to enjoy it for a little while and then pass it on. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to just throw down that money, regularly on gear. But it's funny. I also kind of encourage my customers to do that too. Like, why not buy a '70s drum machine and use it for creative purposes, for writing songs, maybe like rip all the sounds off of it and sample them in your computer and then pass it on to the next person. And
mm.
that's the cool thing about the vintage gear is like if you take care of it, the stuff doesn't really go down in value, especially the old analog stuff. I mean, people just want there's a there's a real desire for those sounds and also like more transistor based stuff and mechanical things that I think we tend to be really detached from in today's kind of modern world. So yeah, I think a lot of musicians are looking for this stuff, and yeah, why not just pick it up, be creative with it, make recordings with it, and then pass it on to the next person.
Well, and I love what you say on the site too, where you're kind of like, this thing shouldn't be just sitting in someone's basement. Like, let's bring it out into the light and like let it do what it's meant to be doing,
Yeah.
like playing
Oh,
music.
totally, totally. I mean, I think in some regards, a lot of vintage stuff, especially in the guitar world, maybe in other worlds too. I tend to know a lot more about the guitar world. Um, there's this kind of a little bit of a culture of like hoarding really cool old gear and sort of showing it off, which is, I guess there's nothing really wrong with that, but you know, it is a tool. A guitar or a pedal or a synth or whatever. They're tools and they're designed to do something with, make music with. So while I do really appreciate the historian aspect and like the having this beautifully curated collection, um, I'd rather see it like get to a musician that's going to do something cool with it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I totally agree. I mean, because my, my background is that my dad was a gigging musician, and so he loved keyboards, and he, especially, he was gigging in the 70s and 80s, and so it felt like the strides that were being made in keyboards as they were, morphing and changing and getting cooler and more sophisticated. It seemed like every other year there was like this quantum leap in how affordable things
Yeah.
were, and how cool and how many things that they could do. But anyway, all that is to say that like he never fetishized the gear.
Mhm.
It was like anything that was in my house growing up, it was like my dad was using it for a
Yeah.
reason. He was gigging with it, or he did a lot of community theater where he would play in the pit bands, and so
Oh, cool.
a lot of times in these community orchestras and stuff where they wouldn't be able to source an oboe player. Well, my dad had a good enough, oboe patch on the
Yeah.
keyboard to sort of like play that line if there was like a key part, in whatever song was being
Sure.
done. And so
That's cool.
yeah, so that's my frame of reference for it, where it's not this sort of like, the stereotypical deck shots where everyone's like, yeah, here's my collection. It's like, well, what are you doing with it, man?
Right. Totally. Yeah. Yeah. I'm much more interested in, well, I was going to say I'm much more interested in what you can do with it than rather than what you have. But I'm interested in both, because I genuinely love just seeing the old stuff and like the rare stuff. It's just cool. But yeah, it should be used. I think pull it down from the
So
wall.
where does a lot of this stuff come from then? Like how do you source it?
Oh, all over. I do some stuff on eBay. I go to a lot of guitar shows. I travel extensively for that. Um, I was just sifting through this gentleman's garage yesterday. I think that was where did I find him on? Maybe Craigslist, and a long time ago. And he calls me up when he gets cool stuff in or uncovers cool stuff that he has laying around. And I've been doing this long enough now where I'm actually starting to get people that are coming to me with trade-ins, things that they want
Mm.
to sell or they want to trade for something else I have. So yeah, short answer is all over, but a lot of digging and also a lot of kind of disappointments with broken stuff that I buy online that I have to
No.
pay to get fixed or send back. But yeah, I do definitely hunt for this stuff. That's for sure.
I mean, this is sort of a dumb question,
Yeah.
but like, was that like a surprise where it was like, you had the idea to do this shop, and then you're like, oh shit, wait a minute, like now I gotta find this stuff,
Yeah,
like
well,
was that sort of like an unexpected part of the gig?
no, I don't think so. Just because I had some frame of reference from doing this for so long at other stores, so I knew like
Sure.
how often the really interesting stuff comes in, and I knew that you have to get somewhat you have to be vigilant, I guess, in like keeping an eye out for it, and also really actively seeking it out too. And a lot of things that I do is someone will advertise something like maybe on Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace or something, and I'll see it, and I won't necessarily be interested in that piece, but maybe I will, and I'll just ask them like, "Hey, do you have any other cool stuff that I should know about that you comfortable selling?" And sometimes people are like, "No, I don't." Sometimes they're like, "I do, but it's kind of sentimental," and of course that's if something's sentimental to you. I always tell them just hold on to it. But sometimes they're like, "Yeah, I got this old box of records." I also sell records too sometimes. I have this old box of records, or I have this old pedal board that I'm not using anymore, or I have this guitar that's in the garage. That happens more often than not. You just have to be kind of like, um, you just have to dig a little bit and investigate and ask if they have it. So yeah, I've gotten lucky with finds like that.
Nice. So, what's your view sort of on the Chicago scene these days? Because you've been around for a long time, like you were
Yeah.
saying, you've got some pretty deep roots here so far. So, like, what are you, with playing out with Joe and the band, and how are you finding the scene these days?
Yeah, I think it's good. The the country scene that I probably know most intimately right now is it's healthy. There's some really good artists out there. I actually play with a woman named Michelle Billingsley. Just put out an album that I wasn't on. I'm in her live band, but and that's a very recent development. She's great, great singer, great songs. She's kind of got like an Emmylou Harris vibe about her. The band I'm in, I think we're doing good. There's another artist named David Quinn that I really dig. That does kind of like an Americana thing, and there's a great live band that we play with sometimes that you got to catch if you're able to. The band's called Wild Earp and the Free For Alls, and they're just a really fun. They have a male and female vocal, so they do a lot of duets and old school country stuff, and they also do some like kind of countrified versions of like Prince and Depeche Mode.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, actually work. They're thought out. They're not just like, hey, let's put some steel guitar over Prince and call it country. They're really well done. So that's the country scene. That's cool. There's a lot of jazz artists that I really dig. A lot of jazz guitar. I love seeing jazz guitar, and Joel Patterson. You may know him. He's a guitarist. Yeah. My buddy Dave Miller, who's bought a few things from me, is a great solo guitar player. There's a lot of good rock music going on right now too. There's a band called Knee High that I enjoy. They've bought some stuff from me. Twin Peaks, they're doing fantastic. Jungle Green is another band that are customers of mine that I really enjoy. It's like old school, like kind of 60s jangly, just really melodic pop. There's some hip hop too that I've been getting into that I'm not going to be able to think of off the top of my head probably, but an artist named Lance Skywalker that I really dig. He's based out of Chicago, but he's on TDE, which is Kendrick Lamar's label, I believe.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, he's really talented. He does he's like a hook man that does chorus hooks for a lot of artists on TDE. Yeah, so there's a bunch of good stuff. I feel like I'm not super plugged into it right now, especially in the rock world. I really have been slacking in that department. But so if you got any suggestions, let me know.
No, I feel so disconnected from the scene. I mean, because, well, it's Brian and I sort of, we made this pivot a couple years ago. I mean, because we'd played in bands together, for a number of years. I mean, it's how we met before we started dating, and was playing music. And at a certain point, other than just like getting old and being tired, because it's like, but in terms of just like having a day gig and having to get up early and so it sort of changes the weight of how late you can play these like Tuesday night, shitty gigs, it's like, it's, you do that long enough and it's kind of like, all right, am I over this, but we always are sort of asking ourselves. And so but part of what ended up happening when we sort of locked into the duo configuration that we have now is that, I grew up doing, musical theater and sort of coming a little bit out of jazz stuff. My dad was a great keyboard player and would always go sit in with like these little jazz groups locally. And so Brian got really interested in that, and we sort of started to think of like, well, how can we take his punk and DIY sort of rock trio that his background, and sort of merge that with my theater stuff. And so we've started doing this like weird sort of like cabaret-ish kind of set where we'll do a bunch of original songs, and then depending on where we're playing, we may learn some covers that are sort of like site specific. So like when we were in LA, we did like some Warren Zevon, and we did, Where the Streets Have No Name, that we did using, your omnichord, like I was telling you. And we played a gig in Indiana last year where we learned some John Mellencamp, and, we did a Janet Jackson tune, and we did like this like weird Eric Satie style arrangement of, When I Think of You, which was like just demented, and we had a lot of fun putting that together. And so anyway, whole point of that ramble is just that, we sort of feel like, man, club gigs, is that like a thing we're even interested in doing anymore? And so we're more interested in like doing in weirder venues, sort of even beyond coffee shops and stuff like that, where we played the Colvin House, a couple years ago, and have been doing these interactive things with our friend Gene Cannonberg, where he draws these like abstract comics that get like projected behind us while we're playing, and so
Cool.
we're sort of like on the outer limits of these weird gigs and weird venues. So yeah, all that is to say, I'm totally disconnected with what's happening in Chicago right now.
Yeah, that's interesting. And you're an accordionist, right?
Well, I mean, having grown up playing keyboard, and my dad was an accordion player, and so after he passed away, there were these instruments that he had that a lot of times that I didn't even know that they were out there. That was like the church that he went to. They were like, "Oh, we found this accordion. Do you want it?" And I was like, "Hell yeah, I want it." So yeah, that's how I ended up with like the huge accordion. And then yeah, we've picked up some smaller ones that are easier to cart around from Midwest Buy and Sell. We've gotten a few from there, and so yeah, that's where the accordion comes from, because I was like, well, if we don't have it just looks cooler. The optics of the accordion, I think, are very impressive.
Oh, definitely, yeah. I mean, a lot of things you can do kind of digitally and get really close, like amazingly close. But seeing someone, like if I went somewhere and someone pulls out an accordion and they're setting up before their set, I would stay and watch that band. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. It's just cool, And living in Chicago.
No, it definitely gets a good response when we pull it out. Yeah, last fall we got asked to play again at the Colvin House here in Edgewater, the gorgeous space that's like a co-working space, and then they also have like event spaces. And every other month they do, again when we're not in coronavirus times, right, they do a cool event called the Parlor, where they cater in really cool food and everyone dresses up in like fancy clothes, and then they always have like sort of this oddball assortment of different musicians, like a harpist or like a flute player or whatever. And they asked us to do it. And it was right before Halloween last year. And so we're like, we did a couple of our original songs, but we're like, yeah, we got to do some spooky tunes. And so the one thing that we did with the accordion was I put a spell on you, and the audience like lost their minds, like when I pulled it out, and then B, when I started singing it, because again we did it like sort of like almost like a murder ballad. We didn't do it real torchy, and we did it sort of more quietly, and so that was really fun.
Yeah, that's a great song. Screaming Jay Hawkins was he was from Cleveland.
Oh, really? I don't think I knew that.
I think he was the original. I don't know if he wrote that song or if he was.
He wrote that one. Yeah.
Oh, he did. Okay, yeah. He was from Cleveland, and God, as far as I know, I'm pretty sure he was. But man, what a beautiful weirdo he was.
Oh my God, yeah. We've just been again in quarantine. We just signed up for the Criterion Channel and have been meaning to rewatch Mystery Train.
Yeah. That's cool. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what the future of the rock clubs are going to be, because I think you're right with the people moving into these kind of smaller spaces, and you can just broadcast things. You can have a really small venue with just a small audience, and yet you can get your stuff out on such a wide scale, with the power of the internet. So. Yeah, I don't know how these rock clubs are going to do in the next few years in Chicago, but we'll see.
Because have you guys been doing any like streaming, like on Twitch or anything?
Yeah, Joe has been doing like basically like karaoke style, and I don't know if you caught any of the performance last night, but yeah, he does like he'll do a bunch of old school songs, and he's such a character. He has like a theater and a comedy background too, so. There's definitely that element going on. But yeah, he's been doing performances on Instagram, on like the IGTV.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, as a full band, we have not. Yeah, we are behind the times. We need to get on that. Because there's like the app now where you can do like the whole band can perform a song. Have you seen that yet?
I don't know the app, but I've been seeing, some of the videos of people sort of in their own homes doing that. But there's an app that does that?
Yeah, there's an app that does it. What is it called? Acapella, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, and some of our band friends in other bands have been doing some really cool stuff with that. So, yeah, we need to get on that train.
Well, because I we saw, when was it, in the fall, Zola Jesus, the singer,
Yeah.
perform at the International Surgical Museum, which was just a phenomenal show. It was like the scariest shit I've ever seen in my life, like in a really good way. I mean, she was just really
What a
intense.
background too on
And
that. That's
oh, it was so cool. But she's been really big talking about, it's like obviously um live performance, shouldn't be replaced. She really believes in that, and in the power of being in a room with people. But then also now has been talking about like streaming. She compared it to almost like public access TV, that it's kind of like no one's watching. It's like, get out there, do something weird,
yeah,
and use some of these live streaming opportunities to really yeah, just bring your weirdness to the fore, and like find your little audience, because people want genuine stuff. Because I think that with Spotify is awesome, but with a lot of those algorithms where you're just getting more of the same of what you're already into,
yep,
and genuinely connecting with stuff that's new and different and weird, it's an exciting opportunity if you have the diligence to dig for it.
totally, yeah. Yeah, I definitely agree with the how big of a tool that has become, the streaming stuff. So yeah, we're something I need to investigate in further, and especially with the business too. I think I've put up some videos of just testing out gear and things on Instagram, and gotten a really good response and made some good connections that way too. So yeah, it's powerful.
It's powerful, but again, like I was sort of joking about, suddenly, trolling estate sales and going on eBay looking for stuff being such a huge part of what you do.
Yeah,
And like now there's this whole other aspect where, yeah, teaching yourself like the tools of all the, the different streaming devices and all the other apps and the algorithms and everything. And that becomes this whole other part of your job where you have to wrangle that digital marketing component.
exactly. Yeah, that'll be maybe one of the first jobs I hire for when I'm in in that position. With some young whippersnapper that knows what they're doing. Um, yeah, I enjoy it, but yeah, sometimes it can detract from other things that need to be done, or other avenues that you want to explore. So
Well, speaking of other avenues that you want to explore, like what's next for you? Like what's coming up for your music? What's coming up for the shop?
yeah, the dream is still to have a physical space, a shop of my own. It's just difficult. It's difficult in Chicago. Things are very expensive here. But that's what I'd like to do eventually, is have a little spot that's not too crazy big, but feels comfortable and people can come to, and it has all my gear spread out where it can be tested. But man, am I glad I don't have a shop right now with
Oh,
what's going on
Jesus,
right now.
right?
I really feel for shop owners. I've dabbled in that life, and it's tough as it is. And then with this going on, it's like, yeah, I feel very fortunate that I didn't take that plunge before this. So
So yeah, so in the meantime, if you want to give a shout out to where people can find you in your various online
I'd
footprints.
love to, yeah. So I have a website. It's called rarebirdsmusic.com. And you can see pretty much everything I have up there. I think it just links to my reverb.com shop. If you're more comfortable shopping on Reverb, you can look me up. Just Google Rare Birds Musical Oddities, or Rare Birds Music should pull it up as well. And that'll pull up I think the first hit on Google is my reverb.com shop. So that's a good way to find me. You can follow me on Instagram, Rare Birds Music. I post a lot of stuff on there and have, like, I don't know, some what I think are kind of clever photos and clever descriptions and stuff. So if you're into that, cool. And yeah, hopefully I'll have a shop soon. So if you don't mind staying tuned on one of those channels, you'll hear about when I do have a physical space.
Awesome. And I will definitely link all these on my blog in the show notes so that people can find it easily and click on through and find their next musical object that they can't live without.
Appreciate that.
Well, Brian, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today. This was like so great to just talk gear, and I feel like this is something that we would be doing on a Saturday afternoon, all things being equal anyway, just like shooting the shit and talking about cool stuff.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, thank you for having me, Allison. I really appreciate it.
couple of years ago, after a show at the Green Mill here in Chicago, the great jazz guitarist John Mulder said something to me to the effect of, "I know you know a lot about gear," and I had to laugh because I so don't. But I've always been fascinated by the rhythms of discourse around gear. I'm a sucker for listening to people talk about the smallest technical details of their hobbies and professions. The passion of specificity is really irresistible to me. So, since I grew up in a house with a gigging musician, and am currently in a band myself, I've picked up a little bit of knowledge about gear, mainly just from paying attention to the conversations happening around me. So it was a blast to have one of those conversations myself here with Brian today. Because one of the other big things that I've always appreciated about Brian is that he never talked down to or past me when my partner would be discussing with him the actual nitty-gritty details of gear. He never assumed that I couldn't keep up or that I wasn't interested, which unfortunately is a fairly rare occurrence in the still kind of macho world of music stores. So if that's the kind of person you'd like to do business with, if you're in the market for some really cool stuff that you might not be able to find elsewhere, be sure to check out his shop online at rarebirdsmusic.com. As always, you can find links to Brian's various online presences and a bunch of other things we talked about in this episode on the show notes on my blog at queenofpeaches.com. Thanks so much for listening. Bye for now.